Hello, everyone. Good evening. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Hi, Roxanne. Welcome, everyone. And we hope you enjoy this evening's program. So we will be talking about the Gardens of Downton Abbey with our presenter here, Roxanne Zimmer. The Heckscher Museum of Art is proud to present this program as part of this year's virtual Art in Bloom series. This series includes programs that cover a diverse range of topics, including architecture, gardening, art, and other topics coinciding with the upcoming Art in Bloom weekend, which is actually this weekend, June 11th through the 13th. Thank you to our Art in Bloom sponsors, Robin T. Hadley, Natalia and Paul Lamb, and Patricia P. Sands. Thank you to our participating garden clubs this year, the North Country Garden Club, North Suffolk Garden Club, Southside Garden Club, and Three Harbors Garden Club. And last but not least, thank you to everyone who's joining us this evening. We couldn't do what we do without you, and we appreciate your continuing support of the museum. I'm Caitlin Scher, Development Manager at the museum, and I'll be your host for this evening. Joining me on screen is Roxanne Zimmer, Community Horticulture Specialist at the Cornell Cooperative Extension. Roxanne Zimmer, PhD, has been spreading the word about best practices in gardening for many years. In her community horticulture role at the CCE in Suffolk County Cornell Cooperative Extension, Roxanne speaks to school and community groups about why we should be reducing lawn area, planting native plants, and many more vegetables. She offers master gardener training and spring gardening school annually. And a recent CCE initiative is the Seed to Supper program, which teaches those in greatest need how to increase their food security. Roxanne has delivered a SUNY Stony Brook course on global food issues, and as part of a Canadian delegation of farmers, she examined food security in Cuba. She has presented at national conferences of the American Horticultural Society and the American Community Garden Association. When not weeding, Roxanne can be found raising oysters with the Cornell Marine Program. At the end of our presentation, Roxanne will be answering some of your questions, so please feel free to type those in the question box or the chat box on your screen at any time. Without further ado, I'll now hand the program over to Roxanne Zimmer. Oh, I think your mic is off, Roxanne. Let's see.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I look forward to the Q&A session when I'm done. So this is two parts. I'll begin with my PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll move to the Q&A.
Perfect.
So as you heard, I'm Dr. Roxanne Zimmer, Head of Community Horticulture for Cornell Extension in Suffolk County. If anyone has a question about anything, any of the topics we discussed, by all means, please drop me an email at rz378@cornell.edu. And that brings us to what we're talking about tonight for Arts in Bloom, the Gardens of Downton Abbey. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, that's not the real name of that enchanted place. It is Highclere Castle. Some of you who watched the series fell in love with any number of the characters, whether Carson or Lady Edith, right? And you may have enjoyed the folks upstairs, and indeed, you may have taken a shine to anyone who was working downstairs. And here's Daisy and Mrs. Patmore in the kitchen. Another reason to fall in love with the show is because of the incredible costumes. I mean, I really wondered what they would be wearing in the next season, because you saw so many terrific hats and coats and capes and skirts and outfits and hair changes every single season. Another wonderful feature of the Downton Abbey series was that the Abbey is a wonderful space, and you see this grand entrance hall on the left and on the right at Christmas time. But today we're going outside and enjoying Highclere Castle for the wonderful garden in which it sits. Now, the current owners of Highclere Castle are the Earls of Carnarvon. They've been there since the 17th century, and it's a very sizable piece of property. You get a sense of it here. Highclere is that center circle. We've got London on the right and the city of Bath on the left. Here's another way of getting a sense of where Highclere is located. If we could go there, if we could have been there in the 700s, we would have seen something that looked like this on the property. It was, in fact, owned by the bishops of Winchester. And although this is not the actual castle that was at that site, the theory is that it probably looked very much like this because it was a medieval palace with gardens. And I am going to take you to those gardens because they have survived. When the Carnarvons bought the place in 1679, they called it Highclere Place House. And you see that from 1679 to 1842, it resembled this building. Now, that's not the building you know very well from the Downton Abbey series, but this is what Highclere Place House looked like for about 150 years. You see that the sheep were grazing, if you will, in the front lawn. It's about a 2.5-story building, you know, very wonderful, prominent estate. My guess is what you and I might at first blush consider the garden is the area in this circle. What I'm taking you to is what in fact was the monk's garden, and it has many of the shrubs that were there back in the 700s, 800s, 900s. As would be expected, it's a very symmetrical kind of space. The monks favored these yew topiaries that they shaped and shaped and shaped. You and I can walk under that yew topiary. Indeed, it is that wonderful and full. It was imagined in the 1200s that there were fruit trees there, providing the vegetables as well as fruit for those who lived in the palace. Today, there is a green peach house here, serving as a greenhouse with roses and whatnot for the castle. And it is here also that they developed a special cultivar of holly, the Highclere Holly. You see it here, and many of the cultivars we know today that may even be in some of our backyards owe part of its ancestry to Highclere Castle. Lavender, typical of a monk's garden. And again, topiary designed in these forms. Just outside the wall of the monk's garden is a white border garden. Some of you may know the work of Gertrude Jekyll, in which she popularized and encouraged people to plant materials that were white or gray, and indeed the foliage and the plants made a statement in and of themselves without any other colors. Here's one shot of it, and here is another of the white border garden. The back of this garden, if we went through this gate, we would find ourselves in the secret garden. Some of us are familiar with this type of garden in which you see these beautiful raised beds parallel to the lawn area. You may recognize some very familiar plants like the cosmos that you see on the left, hydrangea in the back. And what a perfect place to enjoy the delphinium, as we see here for the cast of Downton Abbey, enjoying the secret garden at Highclere. But I will say that this garden area is by no means a large space. We have gardens on Long Island that we enjoy them let's say an old Westbury garden or planting fields, this would be just a pocket-sized garden compared to those areas. As you see here, again, in another season with that terrific Monarda just beyond the white hydrangea on the left side. The current owners, the current Carnarvons, put in recently this wood of goodwill because they felt it was important to recognize their natives, in this case, beeches and oak, which they wanted to draw attention to. So I then will say, well, what then is the garden at Downton Abbey? Because we've got that area of the Monk's Garden, which is not terribly big, the white border, and the secret garden, and then the wood of goodwill. My goodness, is there any more? What I would like to remind you of is why Highclere Castle is so important when you're talking about the art of bloom, is that it's a great representative of what we now know as not the small garden like the Monk's Garden, but in fact, the English landscape garden. The entire property is in fact viewed as or perceived as an area to be planted and to be enjoyed as a garden. And you get a sense here of the castle in that small central circle and then the view of the property from something of a distance. Highclere then was not certainly the first, but was one of the better known English landscape gardens in which the entire property is like a park. And this represents the movement in landscape architecture. And what was so significant about this design is that many of the changes appear as if they were naturally there. You know, the slope of the land, the placement of the trees, kind of seem like this is what nature endowed the space with. Well, what I'd like to tell you is it's something very far from the truth. The English landscape garden that you see here was sculpted. It was created. Let me just tell you where to get a sense of that sculpture. If you go to Highclere Castle toward the middle left, and you look at that lawn, and you see that almost perfect depression in the shape of a U, well, that was not naturally occurring. That was sculpted to give the lawn that kind of beautiful undulating detail front to back as well as left to right. So what I want to remind you of then is that much of this land surface covered with either trees or turf grass was smoothed or shaped to make it appear as if this is what it looked like, if you will, when it was born. The key landscape designer who was very influential was named Lancelot, AKA Capability Brown. You see that he lived in the 1700s and is till this day considered one of Britain's most talented landscape architects because he in fact changed the way Britain looked and the way people thought about the estate. He had primarily wealthy clients, and so he was able to do as much as he did in as many places as he did because he was very well supported, making all of this, if you will, naturalistic style look as if it was originally on that estate. There's an irony to all of this, and sometimes it's difficult for the modern person to see what it is that he changed because it looks, in fact, so natural. Brown is probably the designer of as many as 300 of the finest estates in Britain. And it's so much fun if you ever watch PBS and you're watching a show, whether it's a mystery or some other show, all of a sudden you say, oh my goodness, there is one of Capability Brown's landscape designs, because it is so recognizable. And it is my hope tonight to show you how exactly you can recognize a Capability Brown landscape. So because it was the whole of the property, he was given the privilege of exchanging. That Brown would move trees, he would move waterways. You and I know that today, you know, some group like the DEC would prevent him from the many physical changes he did to the landscape. And in all of this, his final product appears simple, uncluttered. Lines are very clear running through the properties, and that's part of what makes it so beautiful. I have to say that Brown's ideas represented a tremendous departure from what others with a great deal of money were doing with their estates in France and in Italy. In fact, Brown's work was a radical reaction against what they were doing on the continent with very obvious linear dimensions. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So what we see here is a representation of the Via di Castello in Italy. It is a 16th century Renaissance garden. And if you and I could put a scissor in our hand and start, let's say, at the bottom middle of this slide and cut all the way up through the center of the slide, we would pretty much have a right side and a left-hand side that looked almost identical, absolutely symmetrical. Similarly, if we took our scissor from the right-hand side, roughly in about the middle, and we cut across to the left, we would again see pretty much the same on the top as the bottom. Brown does not like this linear representation. So if we go to France, leave Italy, go to France, and we take a look at Versailles, that incredible garden that sits there. If we could sit in the center of that body of water, that pool, if we looked to the north, we would see the exact same pattern than if we turned our head east, west, and south. Each of those quadrants is replicated exactly. And just look at the pathways where there are topiaries in containers. The container on the right matches the container on the left. And although it may switch to a smaller plant material in the next one, that too is replicated on the other side with those cones going down the center. So what we see is a highly formal, very geometric, almost mathematically symmetry that indeed informs what people with a lot of money are doing to make their gardens look interesting, look special. All right, another look. And here we see it starting in England in these Baroque gardens that are at Blenheim. So what Brown wants to do is absolutely nothing like that. He wants an informal design that doesn't have symmetry. It's irregular. I mean, check out those paths that are meandering all over the place. Top to bottom, left to right, goodness, it's all very different. And those of you who can see and or read French, you see superbe jardin anglais. So what someone is saying is, a Frenchman is saying, my goodness, look at this neat garden that this English guy, Capability Brown, is coming up with. I was reminded when I was studying these gardens of the blue willow patterns. Some of you may know that stem roughly from about this time in England. We see them reproduced. And I couldn't help but think of some of Brown's special places that I'll show you in this next slide. You know, just reminded, I could see that pool at Weston represented in some way in that pottery. So then the scale of his land transformation is going to be dramatic. It is going to appear as if those wandering paths were there naturally. And indeed, it's going to forevermore define the English country estate. And he did it very carefully so that it looks like it was wonderfully natural. So what then are those trademarks? What are those characteristics that distinguish a Capability Brown garden? I will list them, and we'll develop each of them as we go on. Brown always wanted a wonderful or grand entrance. He was in love with turf grass, and so we see sweeping lawn pastures in every one of his estate designs. He's fond of a couple of trees, which we can call his signature trees. He liked to add wooded areas for a couple of reasons, like the perimeter shelter belts, because he did not want his clients to think that they lived near a little town or a village, and so they would kind of camouflage it by these shelter belts on the exterior. He liked tree screens. He did not invent, but he loved to use ha-has. He was fond of follies, and he loved water features. And you can see many of those in this Kent garden that was designed by Brown on the left. So this is your cheat sheet, right? This is your guide to reading a Capability Brown landscape. And if you understand these features, you will know how and why he did what he did. He always wanted to make the castle, the mansion, the estate, the most prominent feature in his landscape design. And you see that here in the red circle. So that from just about any place, you can see every feature of the beautiful mansion. Obviously, then he put the gateway, or the entrance, if you will, at the furthest point from the castle. Here is one of his signature trees. This one is his favorite. Every Capability Brown landscape has a cedar of Lebanon, and I'll show you what these gorgeous trees look like in a minute. He also created a woodland on his property for a couple of reasons. One, people could recreate there, and it would also, if you will, block off the sense of they were close to other people. And then the ha-ha. And that was a very interesting bit of design, which kept, for the most part, the animals away from the home, although it looked like they were still right on the property. He typically had some wonderful feature near the water, whether a bridge or a boathouse, and you see that waterway running right through the center. There's town, that's obviously camouflaged by that perimeter shelter belt. And last but not least, you see one of his follies. These are built structures that were designed for entertainment or for their aesthetic beauty. So if you've got these pieces, you know how to read a Capability Brown landscape. So let me take you to some of his estates. Here we are at Downton, and here we are at Stowe. This was one of the first properties that Capability Brown designed. There had been a garden in front of the estate, which he pulled apart. Note there is absolutely nothing that obscures your view of the mansion. That's intentional. He replaced that then, you see, with that beautiful lawn. You get a sense of the pitch or the sculpture of that lawn, right? Kind of dips in the center with those, nice rolling sides. And he diverted a waterway to create this exquisite water feature in the front. So Stowe is often recognized as one of Capability Brown's very important, if not seminal works. Here we see Petworth, again, redirected the course of this waterway, nothing planted by the front, indeed, so everyone can look through the lawn and enjoy the mansion. Here's another view of Petworth from a distance. Another garden of Capability Brown's is Chatsworth, which you see took a lot of hours to build this garden that seems like it was a natural landscape. In some ways, it's almost a gardenless garden. Most of us, when we think of garden, think of colorful shrubs and trees and bushes and perennials. That was not what was informing Capability Brown. He wanted to keep the lines clean, right? Not busy in any way, so that you indeed would not be distracted by those features. One of his gardens, Longleat, was obviously made into a stamp. But as you look at these, you see the repeating themes, the punctuated trees, the rolling landscape, and wherever he can, you see, like here, a body of water running near the front. Probably his most well-known works is the Blenheim Palace, which is now a World UNESCO site, also the Churchill family home. This waterway was not here, right, before Capability Brown started to do his work. Here's another view. And so what he did in this landscape design, he incorporated the entrance on the other side of the water, so you can take in all of this as you were approaching Blenheim. Here you get a sense of his irregular design, much as you saw in that initial illustration that I shared with you with his features. And this is what it would look like in terms of its grand entrance. A thing of beauty. A waterway that was diverted, a bridge that was built to indeed give you this sense of an incredible entrance or gateway to this property. One of the things that I can't imagine is that all of this work, the trees, the buildings, the design, the shrubs, whatever is part of the landscape, was moved by beasts, right? And the wheel was essential in helping get what were fairly large trees, because most of these clients did not plant small trees, into their place on the property. And Lord knows where they were all sourced. This is in the day before trains, to get them to these properties to be enjoyed. And remember, then all of the rest of the work is done by cart, by, again, oxen or mules, and all of the tools are hand tools, so that whatever was resculpted in terms of the lawn was chipped away at with these tools you see here. The redirection of the water, similarly, was done by hand. So then this was the house, this was the structure that in 1771, Capability Brown designed the landscape garden for. It's not this place that we know. Let me just go back. This is now clearly a real 3-story structure with all kinds of wonderful attention to it. Whereas, 2.5 stories, a different kind of facade. a different kind of feeling, a different kind of emotion. Whereas this is a much more dramatic home, which was refaced in stone from nearby Bath. I should say that Charles Barry was the architect, and you may know of one of his most famous works, which was not Highclere Castle, but indeed the House of Parliament. So if you look at the House of Parliament on the left, that Barry did in 1835, you can see how that when he was hired to do Highclere Castle, he borrowed many of those architectural features that you see in the building that we know today. Right? You see the treatment, you see then the full 3 stories and those wonderful effects around the castle. So Sir Charles Barry did both. I also have to tell you that Highclere Castle is rarely mentioned as one of the more dramatic or better known of Capability Brown's works. And I think there's a reason for that. I think Brown successfully rerouted waterways and made a much more dramatic, if you will, front entrance and siding for so many of the other mansions. He couldn't do it at Highclere. I will show you the one place where there is water, and he could not figure out a way to drag that through. And so while Highclere is mentioned, usually in a couple of pages, it doesn't take on the full chapter that so many other of Capability Brown's structures and landscape designs do. So let's take a look at Highclere. We'll start with the grand entrance. You will see that coming up any one of these paths, whether you're coming by foot, whether you're coming by some kind of vehicle, horse and carriage, right? You had this long, uninterrupted view of Highclere Castle with curving paths that would indeed make it more alluring as you approached, whether by horse or eventually by some kind of motor vehicle. Note again, no shrubs near the house, right? Because that's part of that clean, unobstructed landscape design idea that informs Capability Brown's work. Here we have another shot. You can see that kind of wonderful undulating curve in the pasture in front of the castle, right? It wasn't naturally that curved, right, left to right, front to back. And then as that then pulls down into what today is a field of wildflowers. Now, again, a very natural setting. Here's Lady Edith in that area. And note, from just about any place, you can still see every inch of that castle. Lady Mary and Tom out for a walk on the property. They could turn around and very easily see that castle. Then I mentioned another Capability Brown feature is the signature tree. The cedar of Lebanon's were very popular in the 1700s. And in fact, the first Earl of Carnarvon was planting them himself. Capability Brown will put these on every one of his landscape design gardens, and they're just magnificent. You see the pair of them here flanking one of the pathways up to the castle. And again, going for a walk with Isis underneath a cedar of Lebanon. What I also want to remind us of is that we see individual trees here and there. Those were intentionally planted, right? They are like sort of like a punctuation mark, if you will, in the landscape to draw your attention to some space or some area. And then clumps of trees were clustered together when in fact they wanted to make a statement about, oh, look at those beautiful oaks over there, or to prevent the view of something that would be less than flattering. And now the ha-ha. Think of the ha-ha as something that was designed so that the people in the castle could enjoy the property without ever seeing the mechanics of this essentially ditch. And I'll show you some other illustrations. The ha-ha, we think, is a term that's attributed to the French King Louis. When he saw these in a garden in France, he said, aha, you know, it's so brilliant. Our own Thomas Jefferson saw Brown's garden at Stowe, the one I first show you, and Jefferson remarked, the enclosure is entirely by ha-ha. So this is what it looks like, right? If you and I want to put up a deer fence, something to keep the deer out of our property, we typically then will put up some kind of mesh material or wire fence or stone, some way to keep the deer from jumping over and into the vegetable garden. What's kind of neat about the ha-ha is you dig roughly at 8-foot deep trench on that diagonal. And so the deer or the pigs or the sheep, if they want to get over that, they're going to find themselves, if you will, falling into the ditch, and they can never jump up and get up and over that recessed area. The advantage for someone standing on the other side is you have this wonderful, beautiful, uninterrupted view of the landscape beyond. That is, you can see the deer, but the deer are not going to be jumping onto your property. And then the further away that you are, the more it seems like it's seamless. You're not even aware that the ha-ha is there. So the further you are, you don't even know or realize that there is this drop of a couple of feet with the ha-ha. Now here is the ha-ha at Highclere. I never saw it during the series, but I will tell you that recently this fence was put up, and it was not to keep the deer or the sheep or anybody else or any of the animals out. It was to keep the rest of us out, you know, from venturing too far too close to the ha-ha and falling in if we got there. So that's the ha-ha at Highclere. Brown knew who was paying him, and he knew his clients liked leisure sports such as hunting and horseback riding and shooting and riding in a carriage. And so he created these woodland belt areas that felt like, if you will, the woods, so that a family could never have to leave their estate to enjoy those leisure time activities. They could shoot for game or go riding right on their own property. And you get a sense of the woodland belts here from the map, hiding the town there, as you see. Here, Mary and company going up on a day to shoot, going out to ride on the property, or indeed out for the hunt. And what's interesting about this, even out on the hunt, you know, you just turn your head around and there it is, almost unobstructed, a view of Highclere Castle. Now let's talk about the feature known as the follies. They're typically classical in nature, whether Etruscan or Roman or Greek. And what we have here is a pantheon at the garden Stourhead. Now, what's so fun about this picture is that I'm going to show you where we are and let you know that Capability Brown was so successful, he had imitators. And someone took advantage of his ability to use these structures to draw the eye to the distance, to create a beautiful vista. And maybe it was a moment or a place for reflection. And here's what it looks like when you go back, right? Absolutely exquisite. So this banker studied Capability Brown's landscape design techniques, and he wanted his own, if you will, Brown design on his property. So we see this beautiful folly in the distance, the expanse of water, and a bridge crossing the water and turf on either side. So back at Highclere, where are those follies? The first of them is here up at the top of the property known as Heaven's Gate. Obviously the name because it is at the height of the property. You see the three arches, and if you will, go into the center arch and look at that wonderful symmetrical line you see in the center there. My goodness, there is Highclere Castle. But I want to show you how far away we are. All right? So there's the gate of heaven, there's the castle, to get a sense of where we are. Jackdaw's castle in the foreground is another one of the beautiful follies that was landscaped into this design by Capability Brown. And this has been used over the years for garden parties and dinners and whatnot. Never intended to have a roof, but just a wonderful structure. And here we see it in another season, Jackdaw's Castle. It was a place where Lady Edith would have talked to her husband soon to be. And I want you to have a sense of, or just in your mind, get a sense of how far away Jackdaw's Castle is from Highclere. Right? Looks pretty close, right? My goodness. So you see it at the far end on the right. That's Jackdaw's Castle. Again, it's lined up to be viewed one from another. You could enjoy the castle from Jackdaw's and Jackdaw's from the castle. Note it's further away than the monk's garden is. So just wonderful things going on in terms of view and lines of sight, because Capability Brown knew, in fact, what he was doing very well. And then one other beautiful folly is this Temple of Diana. And I'm convinced he put this here because this is the only one water feature, not a large one, on the property. So now you have a sense that what we're talking about as this English landscape garden is the entire property that was sculpted, that was redefined to really emphasize the beauty of that castle. And I often think that many of us know the importance of Shakespeare to English literature. It's probably true that Capability Brown's legacy is that he has done much to change the English landscape with imitators over the generations as well. But I think because his design looks so natural, looks as if it was always that way, it's harder to see the hand of the artist that sculpted those landscapes. And indeed, I think that's ironic. People in England certainly know very well his contribution, that it was in fact not nature that deserves the credit for the beauty of the Capability Brown gardens. So that brings to a conclusion this portion of the presentation. We see Carson leaving Highclere. I would encourage any of you who are interested to take a look at some of the wonderful volumes that have been written about Capability Brown's work. Sarah Rutherford's book on Capability Brown is terrific. Steffi Shields really goes out of her way to explain how all that stuff got there and what kind of an effort it represented. Brown's teams were working on multiple properties at the same time. John Phipps has two books, this one, Designing the English Landscape, and then the one on the left, Placemaking. You see there the beauty of that folly. The perfectly still water reflecting his signature tree of Lebanon. I mean, what a wonderful space, what a wonderful place Capability Brown designed. No relation, Jane Brown's an omnipotent magician, and then Laurie Mayer's Capability Brown and the English Landscape Garden. Some of my references, if any of you are interested, and that brings it to a conclusion, the gardens of Downton Abbey, Highclere Castle, and I look forward to joining you in the gallery with questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. That was fascinating. And we'll start the Q&A right now. So one of our viewers actually had the same question I did, thinking about these landscapes. Do you know if Capability Brown's work had any influence on the design of Central Park or any similar American landscapes?
It did. In fact, I'm doing a talk on Frederick Law Olmsted. And while it's true the Birkenhead Park, I believe that's in Liverpool, had the greatest impact on him, our Olmsted visited England many times and picked up ideas from there. And when you even look at his design of Central Park, you think of, I think of that Blenheim Palace with the curving paths and the waterway that he helped create there. So yes, there was an influence, not as strong as he was affected by another place in England, but certainly it had an impact on him. And it's also true that Olmsted really did not want all of the Victorian fussiness of gardens, right? Much like Capability Brown, liked it spare and liked it lean.
That makes sense. Another question is, the only color that appears in the garden from your pictures was the secret garden. Was there color anywhere else? It seems very green.
And that's what it's hard for us to wrap our heads around. The English landscape garden is about the whole of the property, which is mostly grass and trees, right? Which makes it very green. The gardens, the secret garden, the monk's garden, the white garden are very tiny, and there is very little color. What we would think of as a garden. Like I have behind me right now a native plant. This is butterfly weed. You're not going to see this in Capability Brown's gardens.
Are there any other English landscape designers who seem to be as ubiquitous as Capability Brown? I know you mentioned so many designs he's created. Is he sort of like the master of English landscape?
Well, yes, he is. He had an imitator in someone known as Humphrey Repton. And Humphrey Repton was inspired by Capability Brown and copied a number of his features in terms of design. What made Repton unique was Repton was an artist, and he would create for his clients these beautiful red Morocco books with page after page of illustrations. And what he would do is use the overlay and say, this is what your garden looks like now. And you'd lift the overlay and you could say, and this is what your garden could be if you let me and my team redesign it. So Repton is also one of the well-known followers of Capability Brown.
Another question is, it seems to this viewer that Capability Brown wanted his work to look as natural as possible. However, the turf is cut in an unnatural way that looks almost like a golf course. Do we know why?
Your point is well taken, whoever said this. At Cornell CCE, we're encouraging people to rethink our whole idea of the lawn. The lawn is not natural. The lawn, if it's very green, doesn't have any clover and all those things it should have. We're encouraging folks to rethink or lose or shrink your lawn. If I had to guess, I would say it's Capability Brown's work that has encouraged many of us to fall in love with our front and back lawns. Right?
Which is unfortunate,
and yes, it is
so beautiful.
It is beautiful, but it is not natural.
Exactly.
So great question, whoever suggested that.
Is there a master list of the flowers that he did use in his gardens if somebody would want to grow a small garden similar to these gardens, what plants would you suggest planting?
I would not. In other words, it's really the sculpting of the space that's his genius. It's the clear and uninterrupted lines with the meandering path. So it's the hardscaping as well as the landscaping. So I don't know that that's accurate. If you were asking about other later gardeners, you might say, well, Gertrude Jekyll was planted all things white. You would not be able to say the same of Capability Brown. So I hope that's helpful. Yes, if you could plant a cedar of Lebanon, plant a cedar of Lebanon, that tremendous tree. That would be something that he would say, all my gardens need to have a cedar of Lebanon.
Did Capability Brown design the follies himself, or did he work with an architect to create those actual structures?
I believe he did himself. He worked with, 30 and 40 people at a time. Remember, the hand tools and while he's taken credit for it, yes, may it well have been somebody else on his staff that actually designed it. But he had apparently a pretty good hand at the design and the architecture. But who knows? Did he design all of them? I don't know. But they are replicas of Greek and Roman and Etruscan sculptures, so in shape. So I think they'd be pretty easy to replicate. He wasn't inventing them, if you will. He was just replacing them.
Let's see. You mentioned the cedars of Lebanon. Was there any symbolism behind that tree? Was it just that he was a fan of the way they looked?
I think it's their stature. They're gorgeous.
Yeah.
The way their branches just kind of stretch out. They're majestic. So I think it was their scale. That in his gigantic, if you will, landscape, a small tree or bush really is going to be insignificant, but they can make a dramatic statement if you have a sizable property, on the scale that he was working. I have been looking for a cedar of Lebanon on Long Island. If anyone in the audience knows where there is one, I would love to see it.
Would they grow here in the US?
Very possibly. Our climate is not where we are, is not that different from much of England. So in theory, but I would just love to know, if there's anyone around. My guess is if they're going to grow, it's going to be the Midwest to the east, not the South and not the West.
That makes sense. I think our last question this evening then is, are you able to visit Highclere Castle yourself? Is it open to tourists?
Oh my goodness, yes, by all means. And Highclere, the Carnarvons realized that they have, if you will, a gold mine in the place that everyone thinks of as Downton Abbey, so that they have tours throughout the year. You can actually rent some rooms and stay there overnight. They're selling Highclere oats and Highclere biscuits and all things Highclere in wonderful containers. So yes, the Carnarvons, to their credit, have made something of or taken advantage of their good fortune in that being the site of a very popular television series. So yes, you can visit. It was closed, obviously, during COVID. I don't know now what the regulations are, but indeed it is open seasonally each year.
Well, wonderful. Hopefully one day we'll all get to go visit in person. But until then, I think you've given a wonderful overview, at least virtually, of the gardens and the exterior. Thank you so much, Roxanne, for sharing your time and all this information with us. Thank you to everyone who's attended and participated. As a reminder, Art in Bloom is on view at the Heckscher Museum of Art this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We encourage you to visit, come see the 12 floral arrangements inspired by our new 100th exhibition, the Heckscher Museum Celebrates 100. It should be really beautiful, very exciting. So if you'd like to visit or for more information, please visit our website at heckscher.org. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Good night.
Take care.